Are the exercises going to be local or in a code sandbox? They're going to be local. Hello everyone. Please ask your questions. We're going to start in something around 5 minutes. We already have like a lot of attendees. I know we were expecting more, but it is not already 10. So
Hi, this is JJ. We will be recording this, so I saw that question in the Q&A. And the exercise is local, like Lee said. And yeah, Steve, you can ask a question. So you can ask questions related to stuff as we walk through it, and then at the end of each part, we'll like go through the questions. And then if you have questions after the workshop, you can ask them in Slack. I hope that answers your question. Steve, it will be recorded, so. And then Victor, you can ask questions using the Q&A on here, but we're aiming to keep them related to the topics as we go. And then we'll talk about them at the end of each section. And then if you have questions afterwards, you can ask them in the Slack. For the people raising their hands, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat.
So, hello everyone. I think we're good to go. It is attendees. Nice. So, welcome everyone to the Next.js workshop. Let's see if there's some questions, or do we need to pull a repo or anything? No, you don't have to pull any repo. So, my name is Luis Alvarez. I'm a Next.js developer at site, and I'm part of the Next.js core team. With me is JJ Casper. JJ, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm JJ. I'm on the Next.js core team with Luis. I'm excited to be here.
Nice. And so this is our plan for today, for the next 3 hours. Could I be closest to the mic? Of course, of course. Is it good now? Nice, thank you. So we're going to start with this presentation, which is an introduction to Next.js. Then JJ is going to do a relay coding demo, and then we're going to showcase another 3 demos. One is a blog starter, another one is also a blog with this time with Notion, and then the third one is also a blog, but that one is from a CMS. So, Next.js, the React framework. For those unfamiliar, React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It is component-based, meaning you can create a single version of your header, footer, menus, buttons, etc., and share them across pages. Composing these components allows you to build a consistent user interface at scale. So this is the most basic React component, a function that returns CSX, which looks like HTML. However, to get a simple React application working, it is not as simple as just having your UI. There can be a step barrier of entry to build your first app. You have to configure a compiler and build system, meaning you need something to handle GSX, to handle the building, to unify your application. You have to come up with primitives to handle code splitting, and you have to ensure that the code elimination is properly configured. Learning these tools, because there are a lot of tools to do all of that, can be very time consuming, complex to implement, and difficult to get up to date. So to solve this, typically you want a real framework that gets you up and running quick. Let's start with building a website. You start by building your landing page and marketing pages. And because it is static, it is fast, reliable, and pretty easy to deploy to production. However, content changes require a rebuild and a redeploy, and that is the main downside of a static website. As your project grows, more pages are added, product pages, user dashboards, checkout flows, and who knows, maybe you have a blog now. Suddenly, you have different requirements. Product pages that must have up-to-date inventory and are also SEO-friendly. A dashboard with user-specific information needs to handle authentication too. But your project is still static. You start with a static website, and with this new complexity, you are faced with a decision. You either go fully static or fully on-demand render. So you want a system that can handle both statically generated pages and dynamic pages with different data requirements. You don't want just a static website. Furthermore, typical build setups like create a React app bundle all your JavaScript into a single bundle by default. What that means is that each time you introduce a page, you are degrading the end user experience across all pages because the more pages, the more JavaScript that must be downloaded before your app is rendered and before your user can use it. And, and this is where Next.js comes in, the React framework. It is easy to learn and it is also less to learn. You don't need to learn how to configure build tools, and it is easy to maintain. Next.js has a strong track record of being backwards compatible, and its sign-up today is as simple as writing one dependency. It is also fully customizable, and Next.js still controls certain aspects, but you don't need to learn how it works entirely. Next.js also has a big focus on developer experience. For example, it will reload your browser during development and display runtime errors. And Next.js will let you focus on what matters, that is, building your app. So you start by creating a pages directory in your project. A page is a file that exports a React component, and that's how you have to Next.js will run your page when visiting the respective URL. And JJ, can you confirm that my voice sounds okay?
Sounds okay to me.
Can you confirm to me that my voice sounds okay?
Yeah. Is anyone having trouble hearing?
Yeah, I've seen some comments about it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's me. Okay.
That's all good. Everybody should hear you well. If you can share the camera as well, that would be great, just to keep the engagement a bit higher. Having the screen is a bit unusual, only like screen only without the webcam.
Can do that. Start video. You can see me?
Yeah, that's all better.
So, hi everyone again.
Thanks.
So what was I? Yeah, what is a page? A page is a file that exports a real component. Next.js will make sure to render this page when you go to the respective URL of it. In pages, every file is a path. So in this case, in this example, about.js will go to /about. As of Next.js 9, we introduce the ability to define dynamic rules, meaning dynamic paths, by wrapping the file name with square brackets. Next.js will match any URL by the shape and provide the ID to your component. ID meaning, in this example, we have a dynamic page. Inside it is inside square brackets, and inside it we have ID. This is just the name of the page, and this name will be used by your page to receive the query parameter that is sent to the URL. So in this example, localhost 3000/prod/1 will be the ID that your page will receive. And in Next.js 9.2, we introduce something called catch all routes, which allow you to catch all paths. And these ones are dynamic routes that catch all paths by adding 3 dots inside the square brackets. In this example, Next.js will match any URL after block and provide the path as a slug. As a slug to your component. So in this case, /blog is /2020/first plots will send to your component an array inside a slug that will have 2 parameters, 2020 and first post. So you have a router now. How do you pick how your pages are rendered? The following chart created by a Chrome team outlines many possibilities. And you have full server-side rendering, server rendering with reiteration, and also client-side rendering. Each one of these have their own trade-offs, and you might need to pick 2 or 3 frameworks to handle all your application requirements. So we're back here again. How do you know you've selected the correct framework? You might not even know the needs on your application. But fear not, because as of Next.js 9, you can decide between multiple output targets within the same application. So starting with the output targets, we have pre-rendering, which is a static HTML at build time, reiterated when the user visits the page. In this case, this is great for marketing pages, static blog posts, and SEO. Next.js automatically detects there's no blocking the requirements in a page and will export to HTML automatically without any configuration required. So you start building your React components, and these components, these pages, will turn out to be HTML. Then we also have server-side rendering, most commonly known as SSR. It is great for data-heavy dashboards and content behind a wall, like authentication in this example. In this example, we are exporting a function called getServerSideProps, which is an Next.js specific method for declaring data requirements. Next.js will automatically call this method, which in this case returns the current user, and then automatically inject it into your React component. The presence of getServerSideProps is how Next.js knows the page will be server-side rendered. Now, if you're not a new user to Next.js, you might also have heard of getInitialProps. And so it does the same thing. GetServerSideProps is the same thing of getInitialProps. It's just that we changed the semantics a little bit, and we are not recommending this one instead, but be sure that getInitialProps is not going away. And then we have also client-side rendering, which is it's also pre-rendered to HTML, but the content is rendered in the browser. So this is very easy to accomplish via a mounted hook, which is similar to component mount. It's commonly used for internal applications where speed doesn't matter, like in classic single-page applications. In the initial example, uh, the initial HTML will render the loading component and then switch to the dashboard component after the component is mounted. We also have a static generation. Um, if a page has the requirements that are known at build time, Next.js allows you to fetch the required data and pre-generate the page to a static HTML by exporting a function called getStaticProps. This one was introduced in Next.js 9.3. It is great when you're working with a headless CMS, or if your page has zero requirements, or if you just want it to be very fast, as static files can be cached by a CDN for improved performance. And then static generation can be extended to dynamic routes, because static routes are one thing, but what about when you have dynamic paths? And this is when getStaticPaths comes to play. GetStaticPaths introduced also in Next.js 9.3 allows dynamic routes to define a list of paths that have to be put in the build time. So in this example, getStaticPaths returns a list of paths and also a fallback value. If this fallback value is false, any paths not included in the list of paths returned by getStaticProps will return a 404 page. And the product page component will return a fallback page instead, meaning it will handle the loading state. The isFallback property from the Next.js router, returned by the use router, allows the page to know if it should render the fallback page with the loading state or the product. The fallback page is also static and once served, Next.js will run getStaticProps, as in the previous example, but this time it will do it in the background and then iterate the page with the product info. After that process, the generated HTML can also be cached and served for future requests without the need of a fallback. So at the end, what all of this means is you can have dynamic paths and with dynamic content, and all of this content will always be statically generated. So what about other rendering strategies beyond React? For example, you might want richer search results within Google Search. And Next.js also supports rendering app, identified by the lightning icon next to the URL. And this, in plain words, a faster HTML. It allows you to create ultra-fast web pages with a special indexing by search engines. It was started by Google, and it is now an open standard collaborated on by multiple companies. Next.js supports both AMP efforts, meaning the page only has an AMP version, or hybrid app, meaning the page is served as AMP for search engines, or is also served as a traditional React application for the full site experience. Not only Next.js supports this, but also the Next.js website. So you'll get the AMP version on of our site in your phone, and the HTML version of the site if you use the browser on your laptop. To opt into AMP support, you can export a configuration agent from your page. In this example, this page will be AMP only, and you can also change this to be hybrid AMP. Next.js will make sure to surface and report any AMP errors and validation errors during development and build time. What's very interesting is that, for example, you can have an about page that is pre-rendered, a dashboard that is classes and rendered, and you can also have a statically generated product pages and a server-side rendered user profile. It is like micro frontends, but in one unified project and framework. We can use Next.js as the solution for all these different targets in a truly hybrid web application. And you can design this in a per page basis. However, apps are generally not only a front end. You also need a backend to handle data. You need an API server that scales with your project. And here is when you ask yourself, how can I create an API with the same satisfaction I get from making my front-end app? And since Next.js 9, we support API routes out of the box, meaning that there's no need to have an external custom server. All edits are instantly reloaded and share the same developer experience and tooling you get from your React pages. It starts with creating an API directory of the pages. We create the endpoint itself, like contact in this example. This endpoint will map to APIs, to a /API/contact as expected, because as we said before, you get the same good tooling and experience, but this time you won't be adding React components. This time you'll be returning an HTTP handler, a function that receives a request and a response. Here in this example, we're using a custom JSON response method added by Next.js. And there are more middlewares like this. And common middlewares we include query string parsing, body parsing, and cookie parsing. How do you avoid bugs? A great first step is to start type checking, right? And for that, there is TypeScript. As of Next.js 9, Next.js integrates with TypeScript by default. If you've ever set up TypeScript, you probably know it can be a bit challenging. You need to configure a tsconfig.json, figure out your compilation pipeline, set up watching, surface type errors, some other things. And if you've never set up TypeScript, well, good luck. Next.js handles everything for you. All you need to do is rename a file from .js to .tsx. This works for pages and also for API endpoints. Next.js will add good defaults for building web applications. It will remove the complexity of figuring out TypeScript option, and it can be edited. There's no need to guess what dependencies to install. It fails when there are TypeScript errors to ensure your code is not broken. The Next.js code is written in TypeScript. Every single Next.js API is typed, and you can leverage type hints, and they'll never be out of date. So Next.js can do a lot of amazing things for you. We already covered pages, API endpoints, TypeScript, and AMP support. And we also have built-in CSS support, because CSS in JS is not enough. We have global CSS by importing a CSS file inside pages/_app, which is a component that wraps all pages. And we also have component level CSS using the lovely and well-known CSS models. So CSS, the built-in CSS support is automatically prefetched and compiled. It has code-split between pages, so every page will only include the CSS required for it. And the CSS is extracted into CSS files, and this is an important distinction it has from CSS in JS, where every time you have CSS in JS, it will add more JS to your bundle. With CSS modules, you're only in CSS and you don't need any kind of JS runtime for it. It is hard reloaded in development with a state loss and it has no ordering problems. JJ, did you want to talk about this one?
We can get into the bundle splitting like in the demo so we can demonstrate it.
Nice, then let's continue with this. So to wrap up, Next.js is great for smart personal websites, like the personal website of Tim Nuckens. I heard he's a great guy and that he has to co-create Next.js. And also to full-blown enterprise applications like Hulu, a popular streaming service in many countries. And there's even more. Companies of all sizes use their production workloads to run on Next.js. You might even be using some of these websites or applications daily. For example, we have Zillow and Trulia, which are websites for also another websites for real estate. Twitch, which is a very popular streaming service. Jet, an online e-commerce website. This site that tracks everything I do. That's right, GitHub. If you'd like to read more about how Next.js impacted these companies, we've begun doing some case studies. The first one being with Hulu. Hulu explains how easy it was to migrate to Next.js and the productivity boosts that came with it, among other things. Now, it is time for JJ to do some live coding demo.
Okay. So let's take the screen.
Wait 1 second.
Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. Okay, so let's get into some live coding. So to start with, we want to.
JJ, we have 3 questions.
Okay. Want to knock those out real
Let's
quick?
see. Yeah, it's very quick. Why the return value of get server-side props have a profile? Can something else be returned beside props? Currently, only props can be returned, but we have it that way, so we can extend that in the future with maybe a new feature or something else.
So the main reason is just for like future like proofing it.
Yeah. And can you share something regarding Next.js supporting Webpack 5? Do you have any comments there, JJ?
So Webpack 5 support is in the works, but we don't want to release too many details on that just yet because it's still in progress, but stay tuned.
Nice. Can you share how these pages are rendered sharp? Yes, I will. And then you can continue with the workshop. I'm going to add that to the comments.
So all the questions for now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's dive into this. So right now I just have a basic Next.js setup that you can get started with really quick by just doing yarn create next app and then the directory you want it to be. So that's what I have bootstrapped right now. And what that will give you is a index page, which is just a simple React component, export as a default export. And it allows you just to start up a dev server. And then you have your page. So this is the bare bones project. And then we want to add some stuff to that because the project's not going to be that simple. So let's delete this and go to more advanced stuff. So now we added 2 pages, an index and an about. So then we need to get between these pages on client side. So we start that out, let it compile, and then we have our link right here. So this is how you can interact with the router in one way. You can use the next/link component, and then you wrap your A tag with that, and then you use your href to the page you want to go to. Because as Luis demonstrated in the presentation, every page is mapped to a path on the URL, which we call file system routing, to make it as simple as possible. So you can just instantly see on your file system, oh, I have this index route, oh, I have this about route, without having to look through a bunch of routes that you've mapped somewhere else. And then with Next.js, we also allow you to just map the page with the href. And then we also support, though, source directory, and you can move your pages to the source directory, and it works the same. Still routes the same way. But Next.link isn't the only way you can interact with it. You can also interact with it through the router interface, which comes from next/router. And then let's change this to, still want to have our href there. So I'll just stop the default here because it's an A tag, and then let's grab the router from our hook. And then normally you're going to want to use router.push if you use the router, which is what the link tag is doing by default. And then what this will do is navigate you to the page, pushing it into the history on the browser so that they can go back. But there's also router.replace, which it replaces it in the history so the user can't go back to that page. And then there's also, you can do those with Next.link also. So you're not restricted to the router API. So let's put that back to a normal A tag. Pull back our link component. And notice how we don't have to pass the href to the A tag because that's automatic because we're doing a direct A tag under the link. This is different in some cases when you're using functional components underneath the link tag, which isn't ideal. You can opt out of FS routing. Saw that in the chat real quick, answer that, but it's not as ideal. Okay, and then let's put this back, link. I'll explain that more in a bit. So Next.link. And then you can pass replace, and that does router.replace, like we showed before. And then you have also for the functional component, so you want to make a custom component underneath your link tag. Let's say custom anchor. So we have to use React.forward.ref so that we can attach the ref to the actual DOM element correctly and allow us to prefetch pages properly. So let's create that. Now we can use our custom anchor. And it works the same without the link. So notice how when you go to here, it's not highlighted because the href wasn't passed. It's because Next did not detect that you're passing an A tag directly because it's a custom component. So we allow you to tell us explicitly to pass that with pass href. And now it's passed. So that's how to do custom components on your link. Let's delete that. So there's also a case where you might want to do shallow routing, where you want to change the URL for a page, but you don't actually want to change the page. So then there's this, which let's say to about, but not actually, because we're not actually going to load the about page. So we do href, and then we use another prop called as, which masks it in the URL without actually changing the page in Next.js. So let's change through that, and then let's tell it to do shallow. So now we're still on the index page, but we changed the URL. So that's shallow routing. And something that sometimes trips people up with shallow routing is that you can't do it between pages. So that's something to keep in mind. It has to be the same page or the same href. And then it's just changing the URL. And we do not call get initial props or get server side props for shallow routing. It just allows you to change the URL. Okay. And so for some question, must the link tag take a JSX as a child? Are you referring to doing like a render function? Feel free to pop it in the chat. But no, it doesn't have to be. That was a functional component. You could also do a render function right there, but it's not guaranteed that you'll get the href and stuff properly. It's kind of not ideal. The most ideal way to use Next.js link is with an a tag directly nested underneath it. Can you input a text? So inputting just text is not ideal at this point because it doesn't wrap in an a tag automatically. So you want to put that a tag there. Okay. So, and you're starting our shower option the other day because I didn't realize how. I'm not sure what the question is there. Do you have a question regarding shallow with dynamic pages? Yeah, so that should be proper. So you basically, as long as you're doing the same page, it's okay, and it'll just change the URL, as long as that's what you're looking for. Whoever's raising their hand, if you have a question, feel free to pop in the Q&A. Okay, so we can move on to the next section, if that's all the questions. Does link need to take an anchor as a child? Oh, okay, got it, Ryan. So just an a tag does work. It just doesn't. So basically, when you do just an a tag and you do an href like a normal HTML page, it works just fine with Next.js because we handle direct accessing. So you can go directly to about. The difference is you're incurring the cost of rehydration and re-downloading all those bundles if they're not cached in the browser. So that's the main benefit to client-side routing is you're just pulling in just that necessary JavaScript and loading it, and then you just navigate to that page and execute it, and you get to keep hooking onto the DOM you already hydrated. So I hope that answers that one. And then, as mentioned a bit ago, it doesn't have to be an anchor as a child, but that's the most ideal. If JavaScript is turned off, which shallow? Yeah, so if JavaScript is off, we can't do shallow routing because the Next.js client-side JavaScript isn't running. So as long as you're doing an href properly on your a tag, it should fall back to SSR. Yeah. And so we don't recommend it be just text, and we actually show like a warning that it should be an anchor tag. Technically, it could be, but it's not recommended. Is there a case in which you won't use an a tag as a child link? If not, why not wrap it with an a tag? So we kind of, because we're doing backwards compatibility, we don't want to break that and wrap it with an a tag automatically. Ideally, at this point, we would like to wrap it with an a tag automatically, but we support functional components and other stuff as the children, like I mentioned. So that's why we don't do it at this point. Can you give an as shallow use case? Is it for scrolling to an anchor, for example? So you might want to do it for a modal or something. So you might want to change the URL, but you're still on the same page and you just want to be able to come back to it and use that URL in a browser. I hope that answers that. Yeah, so I mean, we can show that. Pull that in. So let's go to them. Notice we show a warning, but it does work. So it's not recommended, but it does work. Liking your access to route properties. Oh yeah, so to access that, you pull in the router. So you can pull in the router in two ways. You can use with router or use router. It depends on if you're using a functional component or a class component. So with router, it goes with the class components, and then use router is for functional components because it's a hook. So /router. Let's use router because you're using a functional component. And then here we have access to Next.js's router. And let's show that. Go back to the correct page. Left that there. Oops. Okay. So now it gives you your path name, your route, and then the query. On this page, we don't have a query, but you can throw one in there. Notice that it's there. And then we have as path, which is the URL. And then you have is fallback, like LFH showed, which is used in, we'll show later on in demo as it's used. Is user access on server side? Yeah, so this is server side render. And then it's also on the client, and you rehydrate. So because we don't have get initial props on this page, it's automatically exported to like an HTML file, and then we rehydrate on the client. So during the build, it'll just be here. We can show a build real quick. Next build. So this is going to create an optimized build, and this room is all the bloat development. So there's the result from use router during SSR. I hope that answers that. So okay, what was those questions? Where are the questions coming from? Philip, there's like a Q&A button on Zoom. That's where, if you have any questions, you can pop them in there. I don't have access to Slack. Can you send me? Can you see earlier in the chat there was a link to Slack? Okay, so that's all the questions to have for now. We can move on to the next bit. So then, so now to do dynamic routing, we have brackets as LFH showed. So you can do bracket/ID. And then let's start this up. So we can go, so notice how we go to movie and that's not included in the bracket because we didn't define a parameter. You have to define a parameter to catch that route. So now you have movie/ID and we access that using the router, use router, but you can also use with router like mentioned for class components. So it's available under the query. So, and also something to notice when you are doing this on a pre-rendered page at build time, because it doesn't have any data dependencies, this is not available in the initial render during hydration. So if we log this out, notice how it's not there initially because during hydration, we need to match the initial HTML so we don't break hydration. That's a React rule. So we don't provide the query so that you don't accidentally render something different than you did for SSR. And then the first render, it matches SSR. And then after that, we render it with the query so that you can change it. And then it's the same for path, except on this one, it's a catch all, but it does the same caveat of it doesn't match the index route. and then you can match that. But you can also match more deeply nested routes. So this goes on to infinity, or as far as your URL will let you. And this is provided as an array instead of a individual string to allow you to access them individually. So notice I'm using the optional chaining operator right there because this is not there during the initial hydration, like I mentioned. So we don't want to try to access it there before it's ready, because we have to follow that rule of matching the initial HTML that we did for pre-rendering to make sure we get the best React performance. Okay. And then, so with this, we also, you can do on the same level. So let's add an index route. And this will be prioritized over the catch-all because extra slash in there. Okay, so then you can put an index route with all the list because it's prioritized over the catch-all. And we make sure, oh, there's a question, it's optional chaining. Yeah, optional chaining is now included in Next.js along with the nullish coalescing to match TypeScript support. Oh, that's cool. Could you read the questions a little higher? Oh yeah, sorry. I'll make sure to respond louder. Okay, so then that's catch-all routing. So you can access it. Then it's a catch-all, it's an array parameter. And then when it's a normal dynamic route, it's just a string. But when you do SSR, so let's say page, and then sneak peek at one of the data methods. So you might see this like acronym in some places, but like when we use it on the repo, it's GSSP, it's get server-side props, but it's kind of just like a fun note. So we changed movie to a server-side rendered page. So on every visit, it'll be rendered with the data you want. So movie slash hello. If I, there we go. So now on the initial render, it is there because we have it in our hydrated HTML. So we got hello. So let's remove that. Next question. Lise, do you want to pop the Slack link in there? Seen that pop up a question a couple times.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any questions on dynamic routing? Everyone good? Okay. So we can dive into prefetching. Start up our app. So I'm going to create an about page real quick. So that link goes to our about page, and then we have a link right here for dynamic routing. So notice how I mentioned a little earlier that href always maps to your page in your pages directory. So because of the dynamic route, we have to do href and then movie slash brackets ID. And then the as is the actual URL you want to show. So movie slash the first movie. And then that'll take us to there and make sure to populate first in the ID parameter. Oh yeah, it's available in both. So I could pass it as a prop, or because it's available, we pass it in the context to get server-side props, but it's still available in user.router. That was in reference to that you exposed the query as a prop question. There's that one. So let's get into this prefetching. So we have to go do a production build because during development, we don't do prefetching to prevent building more pages than you need to, which is an optimization just for development because Webpack can be kind of slow with larger applications. And we want to make sure you can build the pages you need to as fast as possible. So we leverage a technology called on-demand entries with Webpack 4. And what that does is we inject the bundles to be built on demand. Okay. And then let's start up our production app. So now we're running in production mode. We go to our network tab. Notice how about.js is loaded. It's because it's already in the viewport. And with next/link, we use an intersection observer to catch any links in the viewport. And that's why we do that forward ref for functional components you nest under the link component, is to make sure the ref is attached to the DOM element that you want to catch when it's in the viewport. So, and you can also disable that. So let's say you have a navigation bar or something that might have pages that are rarely visited and you don't want to prefetch them all the time. You can do prefetch equals false. In this case, we wouldn't want to do that because about is probably going to be visited since it's such a simple page. But now we have to do a new build because we're not in dev mode anymore. And then let's start it back up. And now notice it's no longer prefetched. Or let's filter that down. So, but now if we scroll down to the other link, when that comes into the viewport, it is prefetched. And then if you notice here, when I hovered over that, it reloads. Okay, so this is the prefetch we do, which we do with link preload or prefetch, depending on the browser compatibility. And then it does a no op request because it's already in the browser's cache when it's executing the JavaScript. So initially when you load it, we only evaluated the JavaScript bundles that were necessary to hydrate the page and run it. But when you hover over a page, we take that as a user intent that you're going to go to that page. And usually you have around 150 to 200 milliseconds before the user actually clicks it, which is pretty crazy to think it takes that long. But in that time, it's usually plenty of time to evaluate and load that page because it's preloaded. So it allows you to have a super fast transition because the JavaScript's ready to go. Okay, let's take that back. And then when you do a page with get static props, which pre-renders at build time, the data and the HTML, the data is prefetched also along with the page bundle to make sure that everything is ready for the page when you're good to go. So when you hover or when it's in the viewport, the data is also prefetched with link preload or prefetch. Okay. Is there any questions related to that? How to register? Did you get an email?
Hey, I'm currently trying to handle that.
Okay, I'm gonna mark it as answered for now then.
Continue, don't worry.
Okay. So no questions related to prefetching or the router or dynamic routes? Okay, it's data prefetch server side. So on server side, when we do the initial pre-rendering or this initial SSR, we inject all the link preload tags. So when the browser is processing the HTML document, it's preloading those bundles as the page is being rendered. Does that answer your question? So if the intersection observer, okay, so the question is what happens if intersection observer is not supported by the browser? And in that case, what we do is fall back to that hover mode. So gotta start it back up. So if intersection observer wasn't supported, when you hovered, we would preload, and then you have that 150 to 200 milliseconds before the user actually clicks on it, that we can load the data and have it ready for them. Does that answer that question? Okay. Is all the questions for that? Okay, so we can move on to API routes. Okay, so as Alphage also showed in the presentation earlier, Luis, Alphage is his handle in our Slack. Okay, so you add an API directory to pages, and then all of those pages inside of that directory are treated as API routes instead of React pages or AMP pages in some cases. So you can also use dynamic routing in the API directory in this case. So let's pull this up. So we do API/movie, and then this is our index API route, which is here. And we use the res.send method, and you can also use res.end, which is the same. And notice how our API routes get the HMR, so we can make changes live without restarting our server, which is really nice if you've ever used Express and had to restart all the time and wait for that horrible boot up. This is very nice. So HMR for the win. So back to normal. And then we have the dynamic route, which notice the index matched index because it took priority. And then we can also do dynamic route. So movie slash first, we access it through the query here also. So here you have request.body, request.body, request.cookies, and then request.query. So those are the methods available to you there. And then we're using the res.send there also, but we could use res.json, which is a nice helper just to send JSON real quick. So we can do query, res.query, just send that right back to them. And then we can also do another value, literally. And then we have query another value, and then our ID is also there. We sent it back with JSON. So you can also notice how it sent the header for us, content type application/JSON, and that great HMR. So then we also have, and then you have res.status, which allows you to set the status code. Let's do something weird, status code 404, even though it's there. And turn the data. And then we also have, so when I showed earlier the request.body, so what we're doing there is when you send data to the request, so let's do a post request. And then we're going to post it to here. Let's run that query. And so we set the header to tell it what data we're sending so that our automatic body parser can handle it. So let's pull, just show the body to them, request.body, data binary. And then it parsed our body for us. Did I do the wrong route? Just got to save it. And then there's our body. So because we told it content applications as JSON, and we passed the body to it in the post request, our body handler in the built-in utilities automatically parsed it and made it available under request.body. How do you make respond to post request? Oh, right here. So you can tell what the method is by going request.method. Or actually, let's put down the response. Let's compile them. Super. Oh, typo. So notice there's post, and then if we were to do a normal GET request, it's GET, and then the body's empty because no body with GET request. So I hope that answers that one. And then you can have different handling for different stuff just by doing request.method or to do a switch. It's usually cleaner. and then just case, and then so on. So there's the request.body, but in some cases you want to parse the body manually. So we allow you to like manipulate the body parsing. So sometimes you want more control. So we allow you to export a config from the API route, and we call this the page config. So we can add API and then body parser. So if you don't want it at all, you can just disable it, and then it's no longer parsed for you. And then you can also limit it. So you can do body parser. Let's do 2K. And then it's there for us because it's not over the limit, but now let's say it's 2 bytes. Or 2 bytes. I don't know if we can limit it that far. Might have to come back to that one. Or it's a size limit. 2. Yeah, there goes. Body exceeded 2 limit. So if you want to disable it, you just do false here. But if you want to limit the size, you pass an object, size limit 2. But you can do the syntax of 2K, and we can interpret that. Exceeds 2K. Interesting. Okay. Oh, KB, sorry. So you have to add that KB, not just K. But usually you want to have it. So one case where you want to disable the body parser is where you want to do streaming of the body. So if you were uploading an image or something to an API route, and you want to stream it to AWS S3 or something, or to your file system, you'd want to disable the body parser so that it's not pulled into memory and breaks the streaming. But that might not help in all cases, because in some cases, like where you're deploying to serverless infrastructure, the body is buffered already. So streaming doesn't work in that case. So that's something to keep in mind. And then request.cookies, that's another one of the helpers that when a user has cookies set for the API route, it will automatically be available under request.cookies. And then we also have another method called for preview data. So request.preview data, you can set preview data, res.set preview data. And this goes along with get static props, which we can demo in a bit, but that's there also. So now let's get into, let's put that back. And HMR, it's great. Okay, is there any questions related to API routes before we move on? None? Okay, let's jump into the next. Oh, let's clean this up. So now that we've switched over to TypeScript, which is built in, let's clean that back up. Let's delete the JS. So notice how all the pages have been renamed to either TS for API routes or TSX for our pages. The TSX is for React, and then TS is just normal TypeScript. So this automatically tells Next.js that you want to use TypeScript. So when you boot up Next, let's go back to our server, stop it. We notice that you have the TSX files without your TypeScript configuration. So we log out what you need to install. So you can just copy paste that command. And this command will be specific to whichever NPM client you're using, so NPM or Yarn. So now you've installed those. You can start back up, and we'll automatically create a TS config for you in this next end file, which gives you typings that are pretty nice. So now that's ready. And now you have TypeScript running. It's very nice, because you can also, when we go back to that API route, you could do export config and then pull in the type. And then it would show us API body parser. And then you can see what's allowed. So when I was trying to figure out the size limit or limit, it tells you, which is pretty nice. And then if we make an error, so let's go API. let's call this a string. What's the question? Can you use WebSockets? Is the question, can you use WebSockets with API routes, or is it asking in general? You can use WebSockets with API routes, or you can use server sent events. Yeah, so WebSockets work with API routes depending on the environment you're deploying in. So like I said, with serverless functions, they're buffered, so you can't do a persistent connection between the client. So WebSockets wouldn't work in that environment. But if you're doing server full approach, like on a VPS or something, you could use WebSockets with API routes. Next.js doesn't block it at all. Are there hidden compiler options that Next provides by default, or do we need options in the TS config? So Next.js automatically configures the compiler options that it recommends. You can change them if you want to, but you don't need to at all. So the way the TypeScript integration works in Next.js is we do type checking with actual TypeScript. And then to speed up the compilation step, we will use the Babel TypeScript plugin, which strips away all the typings and allows us to use our current Babel configuration. Okay, hope that answers that. Or is there another compiler option you were running about, GP? Okay, cool. So that's TypeScript initially. So, and also another common feature with TypeScript is using the path support, which we recently added support for in 9.3.5. So you can do paths, and then if you want to alias a path, so like let's say add components goes to components, double quotes, and then let's make a components folder. Let's call this a header. Save my header, save that, and then let's go use this somewhere. Header. And let's use that here. So header. Let's reload PS code for a sec so we can grab that TS config change. Oh, we have to throw in our base URL, of course. Sorry, base URL. Let's reload it again so it grabs it. Base URL components. Oh, let's remove that. Back to normal. Oh, typo. Gotta do the asterisk. Small typings. Let's bring that prefix. Paths. My components. Doesn't like that. Oh, here we go. As I mentioned, this is a new feature, so getting to try out live. or not. Okay, so I'm probably missing a tsconfig catch, but the support is there. Oh, so it's still experimental though. So you have to enable it. So you have to do modular exports equals experimental jsconfig paths true. So the reason it's called jsconfig paths is because you don't have to be using a TypeScript project for this to work. You can do tsconfig or jsconfig to get the path support, but gotta enable this important part. And now the support's there. So my header, now VS Code likes it. Yep, we're good. Forgot that gotcha. Yeah, we need that glob. Okay, so experimental. So we can pull that out. So there's also, can you have TS? Yeah, you can have TS. This should work. So let's do that. Start next. So the question was, can you have TS and JS together? And yeah, you should be able to have, and unless you change your compiler options, but the recommended ones allow JavaScript, but you can change that, although we recommend you don't. So answer that. So TypeScript and JavaScript side by side. No, let's start that back up again. Sorry, can you describe the use of paths again? I think I missed the use case. So it allows you to give different aliases to your paths. So instead of doing a relative import, here you normally do, so I'm in the pages directory, so I normally have to go up a directory and then go to components/header, which is fine in most cases, but if you have a deeply nested component and you're trying to reference another component, it can be a lot easier to just alias it to add components and allows you to jump directly to this folder. Yeah, it's pretty great. So there's that. And then we allow, so sometimes in some cases you don't want to be blocked by your TypeScript errors. In some edge cases, like you want to test out a build or something without fixing a new module you imported. So we allow you to disable that using TypeScript. And then you can do ignore dev errors. So in some cases you want to do type checking in a separate process than Next.js does it. So you can disable it that way, or you do ignore build errors specifically. True. So this will stop Next.js from automatically type checking during the build to follow on or check everything. Oh, I can share the repo if you want to check out each step. Yeah. So I'm kind of like live coding from the starting points that I created if you want to test it out later on or try to follow along. So I'll put that in the chat. It's this repo. So throw that there. So this repo started using the yarn create next app. So like you can just run that in your terminal and then you get bootstrapped with Next.js automatically. But as mentioned in the presentation earlier, all you need to get started with Next.js is just a pages folder and a package.json with Next, React, and React DOM. And then you can progressively add stuff as you go. So that's one of the really nice things that we have. And then you can do source S pages also if you want to. And so is there any questions related to the TypeScript support? Okay. So let's delete this. Clean up our changes. Oh, here you go. Can you use the new TS type import? Not yet, but we are tracking that feature, so stay tuned. I may have missed the difference between pages and /source/pages. Is that just in the company book? So yeah, so it's just a preference. You can do either one. It maps to the URL the same way. It just allows you to do preference. So like if you like to keep your components under source/components, you can also do source/pages. Is there any other questions? Okay, so can move on to data fetching. So how about building a standalone front end with database authentication cookies and endpoints coming from a backend server? Yeah, so we actually have a couple of authentication examples in the Next.js repo, which can share that. If you want to dive into authentication, I highly recommend these examples because we worked pretty hard on them. So there's this one. And then we also have an auth0 example. So I definitely recommend diving into those. I hope those answer your questions. Okay, so back to data fetching. So we have our TypeScript set up still. So let's have a rerun this. Yeah. And you're next to reset over TS config. Now we're good to go. And we're back to our page. And then notice how our client routing and everything's still good with TypeScript. No changes in the file. And then another thing about the TypeScript integration is we have a bunch of types from, so we can do, let's do next page. So this is one of our built-in types. It allows you to type your component, your page components, and then there's the page config type. So it allows you to do, tells you which, like what's allowed for the AMP configuration, the API configuration. And then here's something we're about to get into. So let's turn this page into, actually first, let's get some data to pull in. Let's create an API for our movie. So with the API routes, since they're server-side only, they're normal Node.js like endpoints. You can do FS and stuff. So you can import FS from FS, import path, and then you can pull in files. So let's read a file in our data directory right here with some movie data. So and then we want to read that as text. And then let's res.send that data right now from what we're reading. And let's visit this in the browser so we have a better view. API/movie. I didn't like that error no entry because we gotta do data/movies. And then there's that HMR fix our issue and it's immediately available without restarting. It's great. Okay. So now we want to parse this as JSON. So just do JSON parse. And also we typically want to handle our API errors properly. So just pull that up. And we can also do asynchronous functions. So if we want to read this synchronously, we could do promisify it. So now we can have a asynchronous read file. So now we can go movies path, UTF-8. And then we want to catch any errors. Let's set the status to 500 so they know something went wrong. And let's tell them, oops, we did something wrong. In the case where our data is okay, because it should be, since we're always reading from the file system. So res.json that data back, which, as I mentioned, it sets the header for you and then automatically serializes the data. And then we have the HMR, so it's already good to go. And notice how it's JSONified, and so we're just text. So now we have this API endpoint with all of the movies, but what if we want to filter it? So we could pull in our dynamic API route, and let's break this out into a util. Yes. So we can pull all of this out to util. And then export default function. Let's make this an async function. And we can just return the data. Automatically pull that in. So this was the case where, notice how that's getting pretty deeply nested. We might want to like alias that with our paths, because dot and paths. And then let's call that our lib. And then we have to enable that feature, which we missed a bit ago. Note this is experimental while we test it out, because like it just landed, but feel free to test it out and give any feedback, and that'll help us get it out of experimental faster. So that enables that there. And then change our next config. So we gotta restart. And let's just do at lib. Wait loading those. And now it still loads. So now we can go to our other one and do the same thing. We got our error for us in case it goes wrong. Like that. Let's make this asynchronous. And then we can change to. Is everyone seeing the links I'm sending in the chat? Can you drop a thumbs up or something? Yeah, so those are the examples I shared. Please just reshared that for me. Okay, so, and then we're on the dynamic route, so we have access to the query. Let's see what we said. Oh, interesting. Okay, so all panels. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, all panels and attendees. There, that should be good now. Thanks, Lise. Okay, so let's grab our query. So we want to grab ID from our query, so request that query. And then let's look for an ID. Let's use IMDb ID. Let's rename this to a better variable. So movies and movies. And then notice how, so these API routes, go through the same translation process as the pages. So you can use the ternary operators or the North coalescing in the API routes also. And you have the import syntax and the export syntax. So something to keep in mind. So let's look for the movie that matches our ID. So when we find one that matches our ID, we'll return that. And then if we don't, it's 404. JSON. See that? And we have our HMR. So then we go, let's find an ID. And now we can just grab just one using our dynamic routes. Or we can grab all of them using our index route. And they're using a shared lib. Okay, so now we have our API set up. Let's fetch those on the client side. So one of the first ways to do that is just using our client side rendering and using React hooks. So let's pull in use effect from React. And then we're also going to use state. So let's start with state of loading. True. You can also use use reducer or one of the other hooks, but we'll just use state for now. And then users use effect. We only want to run this on mount for now. And then pull. We don't have to pull in fetch because this is client side only. And Next.js automatically takes care of polyfilling any things in older browsers like IE 11. So fetch will always be available to you. So we can do fetch. And we can use a relative path because it's on the client side. So API/movie. We don't need any other else. So do res. And we have a response. Let's catch it in case there's an error. Let's put that for reference. So Aaron state. That to make it cleaner. So then we have our response here. For now, let's just log it out to make this async so we can use a wait. So now when we go to our index page and our terminal, we have our movies. So that's client side. So during SSR, none of that's called or anything. So you could do a skeleton or something at this point. And then once it's hydrated, this will be called. And then once you get your data back or an error, hopefully not, but then you can recall your state. Let's do set state. Data. Let's make sure everything's okay. Actually, let's not throw, let's do, we'll just render on the server. So on the server side, it renders to this state. So you have use effect is not called during server side rendering. The question was, will this render on the server? And so that's what I was answering. Hope that answers that. There's a follow-up question. Feel free to post it. So let's set state. Actually, yeah, we can just throw. And then it'll be handled here. So we have this. So that, and then it's okay. So now we have that. Now we can log out our state. So again, notice on server side, it's just a loading state, and use effect is not called. Yeah, exactly what he says in the chat. Consider anything inside use effect as client side rendering. It's only called on the client side. And then once we're on the client side, first you get loading to match the hydration. And then once use effect is called and your data is returned, we update our state with the data. And we can render that out if we want to. So that's one rendering technique. Let's do a quick rendering. Let's do a quick JSON.stringify, or let's render out the movies. How would you set this component to fetch from the API and be rendered server side? Okay, so we can cover that in a sec. How about initial props? Yeah, one sec. Okay, so let's do it's loading. So see the initial loading, and then let's load out our data. Or because we have turning operators, we could do that. Render out the title real quick. We need that key, so let's do the movie. And now we have those. Oh, we have duplicate from IMDb IDs. Interesting. There you go. So then we have these. And then we could add these as links to go somewhere else. Change this to a div. Make it a link. So remember how we had to do movie/bracket because it matches the page. So ID, and then as is what we want to render as. So let's use our ID. Change back. And now we have links to take us to somewhere when we do it right. Gotta capitalize the D. And that takes us to the correct spot. So that's client side. So now if we want to get rid of the client side, we want to do it on the server side, so it's available in our initial HTML. So notice how it says loading. This could be a skeleton or whatever you want to render. So let's start with, so that was the API from client side. Notice how we were fetching /API/movie. So that's using the API we wrote here and here. So let's comment that out. Don't need use effect. Don't need the state. So let's move to passing as props. We won't have a loading state. We might have an error state, but let's start with just running out the data. So now let's make TypeScript happy with any. Okay, so since initial props was asked about, let's show that real quick. This is going to show why you don't need initial props anymore, because we've created new data fetching methods that solve the problem way better. So initial props is a legacy method that isn't going away, but it should no longer be needed. So we can throw that on there, and then let's fetch our API. So the way initial props works is it's called on the server for SSR, and then it's also called on the client when you do a page transition. Could we complicate this a little? What is initial render would return first 10 results in the client on button press, you want to load another 10. So yeah, you can do mixed data fetching. So you could do server-side rendering with get server side props or get initial props. So here we just move our fetch. Although here we can clean it up. So we can do cons. So here, because we're doing on the server side, we have to import fetch. So node fetch. We haven't installed it yet, so let's install that. Okay. And we want. We actually do to do isomorphic on fetch because this is getting initial props. Actually, so let's just consider get initial props legacy, and let's not cover it for now, but it's in our documentation if you want to look into it further. I don't want to confuse the new data methods with the old ones. So let's stick with get server side props. So this is the evolved get initial props. It's called on every server side render, and it's also called on client transitions, but this is always server side. Anything inside of here is like an API route, and you can access anything server side. So you don't have to restrict yourself to being isomorphic, meaning anything you write inside of that method has to be able to be called on the client and the server. So here we can just use node fetch, or even better, we can just import load movies. Movies equals load movies. And then we return props. So here we call it data. Let's just change that to movies real quick. But a nice thing about having this in the same page is you can type this out and call it, have this share the type between the props and where you're actually returning the props. So let's return those movies. And then we can demonstrate that this is always called on the server. Still need node. We don't need node fetch because we're calling it directly, which is a really nice thing about these new data fetching methods. So we can restart that. Cancel those as. Put movies, get server side props. We get to export it. I have to export a page component. So now notice it's there on the initial hydration. So no loading state, it's all ready to go. And you can still transition pages. So when we're on this page, notice how it says call the initial prop, called get server side props. When we navigate back, it will call it again. And it's always on the server side. You will not see that on the client at all. And we can actually dive into this further. Another feature of get server side props is all of this code is dead code eliminated for the client side bundle. So load movies, and all this await load movies, it's not on the client. So you could do MySQL, you could do a direct gRPC socket or anything you wanted inside of get server side props as long as it works in Node, and it'll automatically just work in the browser too because the browser does a call, which we can show. Let's restart a server. So we go here and then let's clear our network. When we go back, we do a fetch to next/data, and we fetch the JSON file, which is the result of calling this on the server. And here's the props. So we can inspect this. So notice our data is here. So that's a really nice feature. And you can actually dive into this further, which we made a tool called Next Code Elimination, which shows this in action. So notice MySQL being imported, which normally would throw an error on the client side because Webpack isn't set up to handle Node stuff by default. So get server side props uses cookies and then uses the pool and all that, which is set up here. MySQL create pool. And then this is what actually is bundled on the client. So that's a nice thing. If you want to play with this here, let's put this in the chat. Okay, how do you set component to fetch from the API via render? So that's one way to, okay, so the question was, how would you set this component to fetch from the API and be render server side? So this is the way you do that with get server side props. You wouldn't want to actually call fetch. So we wouldn't want to do res equals await fetch API/movies, because this creates like a circular dependency in your application. So if you were to do another data fetching method, which we call get static props, you'd be relying on your API when it's not already built. So instead of calling it fetch on it, it's more recommended to just call what API is doing directly from the method. So just creating a shared lib and then call it from get server side props or get static props. Okay, so, and then someone mentioned, one of the questions was, what if you want to complicate things? Yeah, could we complicate things a little? What is initial render? Would return first 10 results, and in the client on button press, do until another 10. So we could do that here. Let's just do movies.splice 0. Let's do first 5. So now we only did 5, and then so in our API we could also limit that. So in our lib, I mean, so we could limit how many we're returning, and then in our API we can match that. So here, let's do push state back in. We need that again. Don't need use effect because we're going to do the initial on that. Props.movies. Let's rename this. So we have that. Now that works okay. And then we want to add a button. Let's say right here. We're going to load some more when that's clicked. And then we don't need to pull in fetch because it's already polyfilled on the client. So res equal, let's just do fetch. We can just move this from here to here. And then so during data, we want to do movies. But let's like concatenate them. So now we can concatenate movies. No. So there's going to be a little repeat in there because we're not filtering on the API level, but so that's how you complicate a little. So you have the initial data here, the first 5, because we spliced it on the get server side props. So we return first 5, which is there on the initial render. And then when we click the button, we fetch our API, and then we load more. So I hope that answers that one. I noticed the branches in the repo, 5 TypeScript, 6 data fetching, are all pointing the same commit. Will the changes be pushed as we go through the workshop today? So I'm not pushing the changes as we go, so we can go through them live. So if you have any questions in the Slack, if you want me to like do any code snippets, feel free to ask, and I can push those up for you. I hope that answers that one. How would you share the types for movies between API and client for props? So you could create a util. So let's say movie equals. So you can type this different ways, whatever your TypeScript preference is. I'm going to stick with type movie for now. So let's look at our data real quick. So we have a title. We have a year, which is a number. Oh, no, it's a string. And then we have rated string. Also, props to the API for the data. That's where I source this from. And then we have the released, which is a string. And let's pull the IMDb API. IMDb ID, which is a string. So now we have those types. So now we can add a return type. And then, so now we have that type here. And notice how the type applied here because we used this and it already has typed here. So then we could also add that type up here for return type. Get static, get server side props. Oh, we have to type that down here. So let's just pull this in, do movies. Let's export that. Like that. And now you have shared typing. So now down here, we should be able to see IMDb ID. And then we have title and our types. And then we can also throw in movie.year. Notice the type error because lowercase. And there's that. Okay, so I hope that answers that one. So between API, so in the API, it's also there. So load movies, it's a movie. Okay, so that's that one. Is it code in GSSP tree shake and client bundles? Yeah, so I hope to answer that in the util we showed. Where was that? The next code elimination.now.sh. I'll repaste that real quick in case you missed it. So that demonstrates that's here. This is the client side bundle, and this is your like initial source. So anything in here, if you any imports that are referenced inside of here and are not used in your page rendering, are automatically stripped out from your bundle, from your client bundle. Okay, so can we see an example from an external API from to-dos? So it's basically the same concept. So instead of doing your own API endpoint, you just reference their endpoint. So because it's an external API, you could use fetch. Here, let's see what shape this gives us. It's taking a moment. Maybe not. I mean, if somebody has like a quick API, I could show it real quick. But this concept is the same. So like imagine you deployed these API routes on a separate endpoint. You could request them by just adding the full URL. So you do node fetch here instead. And then here you do, where's our, you do the full URL. So like https myendpoint.now.sh. So that'd be the main difference. You'd use fetch here, and then you'd use node fetch down here, which would also be tree shaken because the polyfilling doesn't need you to import node fetch. Okay, so take a minute. Not sure we should wait on this one. Looks like it's going a bit slow right now. Okay, so I hope that answers that one. Do you have any follow-up questions? Feel free to ask. Okay, so is there any questions on did server-side props before we move on to the next one? Okay, resolved and bundled during build on client side when they're used there. Okay, so the client side process.end values are only inlined if you specify them in your Webpack config. So if you do end my process value, so let's just call it that. So let's put that there, and then we can put that, just throw it here. And then that will be inlined. So we had to restart because next config is not able to be hot reloaded at this point. So anytime we modify that, we have to restart next server. So that is inlined in the bundle. Let's go look at that. We can do a quick build. And we can inspect the output. Here's our build pages. And we put it in index. Let's clean this up. So notice it's minified because we optimize the client bundle as much as we can. And then there's a value inlined right there without process.io. Okay. And it's also inlined on server bundles, which you wouldn't want to do that for secrets like API secrets for MySQL or something that you're using down here. You would not want to use this end config. You just want them to be in your runtime config. So you'd want to be like my API secret equals super secret. and then your next. And then you would not want to access it here by just doing process.env cleanly without using end, because you don't want those to be accidentally inlined in your client bundles. And then this will be tree shaken away for the client bundles. So I hope that answers that question. And then for greenfield projects using Next.js, does that mean we don't need a separate API server anymore? Yeah, I mean, for most cases, API routes cover your use cases. But if there's a use case you aren't covered by it, then you could use an external one. But yeah, we're pretty proud of the API routes because it's really nice to use, especially with HTML. And then we package them individually from your pages when they're deployed on site now. So we optimize them as much as we can. So I can show you that. So API server static. We gotta do, oh, we did a development build. So we gotta do a production build. And now we can look at the production output. So now this doesn't have React or anything. It's just an API route, which is really nice. So that answers that one. Is there any follow-up questions for what wouldn't be supported on the API routes? Cool. Okay. Yeah, definitely we're shooting for as secure as possible for the dead code elimination and all that. And that's why we want to provide this tool to show you like everything is dead code eliminating so you can see. So like if you were to accidentally include pool in here, it would no longer be dead code eliminated because you're using it. And this is like your client side boundary. This is telling us we're going to need that import on the client side, but this would throw an error during the build because MySQL is using stuff that's not supported in the client build process. But if we remove that and it's only used in get server side props, it's tree shaken away. Okay, so that's get server side props. Let's remove that. Any other questions related to get server side props and API routes? Okay, so let's move on to the next data fetching method, which is get static props. So this has pretty much the same mechanics as get server side props, except we're going to see the question quick. So are we going to cover any GraphQL or Apollo integration? It's not planned. If you want to look into Apollo stuff, we have some examples for that in the Next.js repo. I can paste those. I can paste that, or Luis, do you want to paste some Apollo examples in the chat?
Sure.
Okay, so let's see, press that, let's fix that, reload. So now we're using get static props instead of get server side props. So what this means for your page is it's available when like it's available on the initial render. And then when you transition pages, it's also available. Like get server side props. Let's go index. Let's go to one of these. And then when we go back, it does a fetch like before. And during development, it's always called to allow you to debug it. But during a production build, let it build real quick. And then we inspect the output. Notice that we have an index.html file and an index.json file. The JSON file is your data that was returned from get static props. And this file will be used anytime that next/data request is made. And then the HTML file is made anytime you request this page directly. So let's do a quick start. So notice get static props is not being called. It's because we're just using the HTML file that we generated at build time. So this is a static site generation. And it's very nice because it's pre-rendered and it's allowed to be pushed to the edge. So like on site now, when you pre-render your pages, we push it to our CDN edge, and then it's immediately available for all of your clients, and it's no chance of going down. Like if you had to get server-side props and an API went down, then you would no longer, your page could go down too. But this solves that by pre-rendering both the data and the HTML. So when you navigate back to the page, it's using the JSON that was pre-rendered at build time. So, okay, so unrelated question, why is the pages dir at the top level there Can they be inside the source store? Yeah. So you can nest this under source now. So it can be source/pages, and it's the same thing. So, and then it works the same. So we answer that one. Is there any questions on get static props so far? Okay, cool. So like it's the exact same code elimination. So like if we change this to get static props, you can also use this tool to see that. So that's all that's left in your client bundle. And all these imports, the MySQL, SQL, all those can be used on get static props also because we pre-rendered on the server. Okay, so question. Given projects with many pages, like a news app, how does get static props affect build times? So it depends on how many pages you're pre-rendering and how fast your API is. So like something we're going to show later on, if we have enough time, is the Notion blog example. So when I was benchmarking the API request we had to do to get the data we needed, it would take around like 150 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds per page, depending on like where you're hitting it from and where you're building. So what you can do to optimize it is you only pre-render the pages that are most popular. And then we have an option called fallback true false on get static paths that allow you to pre-render pages, no, post-render pages. So you can pre-render the most popular and then post-render any less popular pages, but you still want to be able to serve them. And then after those are post-rendered, they will be cached and then served in an SWR fashion or stale while revalidate. So it uses the cached stale version and then regenerate, and then it uses that version from that point on. And then we also have another option that's we post an RFC for called revalidate and get static props, which allows you to, after you post render something or even pre-render it, you can revalidate in the background and then serve the new data after it's been revalidated. So it allows you to have that resilience of if an API goes down and your get static props fails after a build, it still has data available to like send to your user, but you can still have data updated in the background. So I can demonstrate that after. So if there's no more questions on get static props, we can dive into get static paths. Just I'll mark this one as answer. Okay, so let's dive into this one. So this is a good like candidate for get static props or get static paths. So get static paths is only needed for a dynamic page in Next.js. So this page, you can only have one path. It's just the index path. So you can only get the props for this path. But then if you have movie/ID, you can have multiple paths like movie/first one, second one. So we can't know all the props we want to get. So get static props. Make that async. And then here we're going to have some data. Oh, we can also type this because we're using TypeScript. So get static props. And then that tells us we're not returning the right stuff. So that's a nice feature. So here we want to load in one movie that matches our ID, but we don't know what ID that is yet because we haven't defined get static paths. So get static paths. Let's also use that type to help ourselves catch errors. This one does not receive any context data, but this one does, as you notice in the signature. Here's this one. So we'll go back into that a little bit more. So from this one, instead of returning props, we return paths, which is an array of either strings with a fully built path or an object with the parameters that is required to build the path. So I can show both variants and real quick. And then we also need a fallback parameter. So fallback defines that behavior I was talking about where it's either pre-rendered at build time only, or you allow some pages that weren't pre-rendered at build time that weren't defined here to also be pre-rendered or to be post-rendered. So let's define some. So first we want to get a list of them. So movies, pull that in there. So now we have our movies. But normally here you wouldn't want to do a full request for all the data, but since we're on the file system, it's a quick read. So here you want to do a more optimized call for just the path data you need. So like select ID from your pages or whatever. So paths. So let's do a string variant for some movie slash, actually. So first we're going to start with pre-running all of them. So let's do movie. And notice here we have our types because we added those to load movies. And then we want to return a string. So movie slash, and then whichever movie we're rendering. Let's use the ID because it's probably cleaner than the title. Start with fallback false. And now up here, now that we've done that, we have available to us here params. And that gives us the ID from the dynamic route. So this was a more nested one. So if you had like list slash ID slash path, ID and path would both be available in the params. In this case, we only have ID because we're just doing movie slash ID. Let's delete that quick. And now we have to recall this. And typically here is where you want to implement some sort of caching. So if you're hitting an API that doesn't have caching already implemented at the edge, you'd want to implement like something like file system caching or a Redis cache so that you're not re-hitting the API if it's in a high cost API. But since we're just doing the file system, we don't really need a cache since it's already file system cache pretty much. So here's where we want, because when you call get static paths, it's in a separate process from get static props to allow that revalidate behavior we touched on, because this would be bundled, but this would not be needed to be called again because we only need the paths at build time. And then we need our props. So we need all the data we need to regenerate our props separately from the paths. I hope that makes sense. So we have our movies and then we just want our one movie. So let's filter that. Let's find our first movie. There's that TypeScript saving us. So now we can go to here. And there's a call to get static props. And then we have that. And it's available in our initial HTML. So there's that. Movie ID and then our data. Let's render out some more data. Put a fragment there. And props. And then we have props.movie title. Start with that. Now all the data is here on the initial HTML. And it's also available when we navigate it this way in the JSON request. And notice how when we do the next data request, it now has the ID and it automatically parses that for the next data also. And get static props is called no differently. And we also call get static paths during development every time to like help you debug it. But during a build, it's only called once. So let's add that and do a build real quick. So here's this. And then I just get static paths, static props. And then if we do a build, so it calls get static paths. And then get static props is also called, yeah, get static props. And then we have all of our data in here to inspect the build output. So movie, and then all of these paths that we gave back from get static paths are pre-generated at build time for their data and their HTML. And then we can also limit that. So let's only pre-render the first one. The first one's our most popular one. It still needs to be array though. So let's do movie slash. So let's also show this format, movie. So you can also do params, and then you can do ID. Now let's go get one of our IDs. So this allows you to not have to type out the full path and only provide the values you need to. So there's that. And let's do another build. So now it gets static props. That's our old build. This is our new build. And now we only have that pre-generated. And because we said fallback false, that's the only one that will be served. So that one's served. Let's go get a different ID. Let's see. And notice how this 404 is because we didn't pre-generate it and we told it to fallback false. And now if we change this to true, and we do a new build, title undefined. Maybe typo. Let's do a quick cleaning. Okay, so that's good. And now let's clean out the next directory. More visibility. Looks like we're not filtering our data right. Sec. Oh, good catch. Awesome. Well, handle the fallback case. Okay, so we're smart. Okay. So, and then we have is fallback, which Luis briefly mentioned. So doing is fallback, we allow you to pre-render, and then we still show an HTML file in case your data takes a long time to show. You can have a skeleton show. So return loading. So now we're built correctly because we're handling the fallback, and we pre-generate the fallback file, which is over here. Current build is movie. So this is our fallback file, id.html, which has the loading state, which is rendered when you request a non-pre-rendered file. And then there's our one path that we pre-rendered. So this one was, and then notice how we don't have a loading state after that because we put it in our cache. And then let's go grab the original one. And then we will have an error because we're not handling the 404 case of that. So here we'd also want to handle this return not being able to find the movie because that's possible since it's outside of the paths. So this could be any value pretty much because the user is now supplying it. But this is a pre-rendered one and there's no loading state. I'll show it one more time. Sonic the Hedgehog, and then let's pull out the ID. And there's that quick loading state. And then we request the data file on the client side, and then we repopulate it after we get that data back. Okay. And then there was that error from the undefined one. So if we do that, it's all server side. So can we do redirects on the server? Yes, you can. Oh, let me review the question. Can you do redirects on the server? You can do redirects on the server with get server side props, but not get static props. So if you want to do a redirect with get static props, you'd want to return like a redirect here. And then you'd handle it in your rendering logic on the client because get static props is pre-render only. It doesn't have access to a response object like get server side props does. Or we could show a redirect with that real quick. So export get server-side props. Type that. So we have access to the context. And in our context, we have response. And then we can do res.set header. We also need to set the status. Let's do 307 for temporary. We still need to return the props object from here because it's a required return value, even though we're doing a redirect. Because this is what will be returned if you do a next data request. So start back up our dev server, save that file. That's our next page. Here's our redirect. Notice it redirected us. And then if you were to do a message, wants that to be using. That was that type error. Okay. So we can go back. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, so when you're doing a redirect with get server-side props though, you still need to handle the client transition case in case you do a link. So if you do link to about now, it will return no props. So like that, it handles it already. Okay, so next link will handle it. So that answers that one. So I know that Gatsby Cloud has started to release their incremental builds feature for hundreds of thousands of pages for optimization. Do you have anything similar? The pre-render and post-render config is seemingly a great way to handle that in the interim. Yeah, so this is a step in like, instead of incremental building your entire application, we allow you to incrementally build only the pages you need to do that to. So you can just incrementally build the movie page and then you can like have all these pre-rendered. So we allow it to be on a per page basis instead of on a complete build basis. So, and we also allow a preview feature. So if you were to do fallback false and you pre-generated all your paths, but you wanted to edit and preview some of the movies or whatever, you can do that by using our preview feature, which is used in our API, which we can demo a little in a bit. And that's here we can type this. Here's some other type values. So next API request. And now this will show us set preview data, which allows you to set some arbitrary data. And then after you set the data, you'd want to redirect with the header. And this will set the cookie for the client. And then you're in preview mode after that. Okay, which we can show some more in a bit. So is there any questions on, can we use dynamic path params in get static paths? Can you expand on the question? So here we're returning the dynamic path segments. You don't need to be aware of any when it's being called. It's like there's no context because you're supposed to return the values. Does that make sense? Feel free to do a follow-up if not. How can we update cached JSONs in the background? Do we have tools for that or simply file system operations? So that is the revalidate behavior. So this is still, we posted an RFC for that. Let's pull that up. And over here. So it's called incremental static generation, and it leverages our revalidate behavior. Put this in the chat. So if you want to give that a read. So right now it's called unstable revalidate. And then this allows you to revalidate in the background. So false is the default behavior where it only does it at build time or once with fallback. And then you'd give it a time frame in seconds. So let's say after 1 second, we want to do another render. So let's do that. And then let's pull up our movies. Let's go to onward. So it says onward 2020. Okay, Luis just posted in the chat. We'll only do 2 more demos because we're getting close to the end. So let's do this revalidate real quick. So onward, we edited that. So now revalidate. It doesn't. Oh, we're in dev mode, so we have to do a build to actually see the revalidate behavior. Because like I said, get static props is always called to allow you to debug it. So start, and then that's the cache. It's cached, and it's not. Do we revalidate right? Fallback true. It may not be honoring the revalidate since we just changed the field recently. So, but this is how it will work once it's landed stable. So it's kind of a brief preview. And then this would update in the background afterwards. That's it. Oh, good catch. You're on fire, Miguel. Okay. So we'd have to rebuild that. And then we'll do start. Now it's there. And now we should be able to revalidate in the background. So first request, and now the second request is updated. And then we add it again, keep uses the cache, and then revalidates in the background. Awesome, thank you. So now we have that. So move on to, so we have get static props. Is there any questions on get static props, get static paths, get server side props? Feel free to answer this in the end if it's not relevant to your demo, but does Next have a special way of loading custom web fonts? It doesn't have a built-in custom way, so the standard ways are available to you. I hope that answers that. But the CSS support does handle it. Is it possible to load some shared static data in all pages? So get static props does call underscore app get initial props. So right now we're currently investigating whether to support an individual get static props in underscore app. But for the moment, you can do get initial props and then return it outside of page props. And the data is available to you that way. That answers that. If you want more of a in-depth into that, feel free to follow up. So close that one. Okay, so I'm gonna dive into, so we can do a real quick one that explains our 404 behavior. So usually you wanna, if you want to have a custom 404 page, you used to have to do an underscore error. But recently we added in a 404 page. So the goal of this was to make adding a static 404 page super easy. So we don't allow get initial props or get static props or we allow get static props, but not get server props in 404.js to make sure it's static as often as possible, because your 404 page could be requested a lot and you don't want to incur the server-side renders every time. So custom 404, let's add that. And then let's go back to dev mode. Let's do random. Let's not break that. Export this, right? Export default. Did I create that? Yeah, you gotta get rid of that. That error was because I created an underscore app without exporting a React component. So, and then here's our custom 404. And then when you do a build, we'll pre-generate this so that it's always static, unless you do get initial props and underscore app, which opts it out of being static, unfortunately. But then you can use get static props to re-opt it in, which is a nice helper. So here's the 404, which is static. So it's always fast. Okay. And then let's dive into CSS support a bit. So let's go clean this up. So let's go on our index page right here, Q&A. Can we have a different 404 for a movie / non-existing movie? So you can conditionally render it on the client side if you want. So you still have access to use router and everything. So you can do, so let's say here. And then you can conditionally render on the client side. So like something like that. That's just a quick example. Does that answer the question? But this would be after hydration. So initially it would just be the normal 404, or actually it's not path name, it'd be as path, sorry. And this would be the actual value. So I hope that answers that. Okay, so we'll dive into CSS real quick. So let's close that. And let's go to our index page. So as mentioned earlier, our CSS support allows you to do global CSS and module level CSS. So you can do an underscore app, let's see TSX, consistent, close that up. So we can do import, let's create a CSS file real quick. So now let's import that. And then we need to export a app component still because we define an underscore app. So component, page props. So that's a minimal underscore app that allows you to import global CSS. Start that out. And now we have a background of orange. And then we can go into our index file. Let's do an index.module.css, which you have to call it .module.css, which is a naming convention to signify that it's allowed to be imported outside of underscore app. And then let's do .home. And now this will be available to you under CSS. Let's make this a div. So I did. That was a TypeScript error because the import syntax. So import all. Oh, there we go. Okay, so then you have your global and then the module. So that covers the CSS. And then the reason we made it so it's at a per page level for most of it, and then you have to define global and underscore app, is because global is shared by all pages. And you don't want to accidentally import a large global CSS file in one of your pages, and then all the other pages have to incur that cost. So we make you explicitly do an underscore app so that it's loaded up front and you can see that it's global between all the pages. Do you also support? Yes, we also support styled components and emotion for CSR, SSR, but styled components require a .babelrc, which we have an example for, which we could share. Drop that in the chat. So that's the only thing needed for, and then you also need a custom underscore document, which is similar to underscore app, except underscore document is only called on the server to render the initial HTML template. Okay, so, and then the CSS, so, and then this will be code split to only load on this page in a production build. Okay, so does that. And then we also support Sass or CSS. So we can change both of those. And then we also need to do yarn install Sass. Yarn add, sorry. And then yarn next. Gotta change your imports. Should be good. Yep. So as Sass works too, the same way as the same behavior as CSS and the same code splitting and logic too. And then for the Sass support, we also support the include paths now. So you can, it's still in an experimental flag, but it's supported. So you can use Sass options and then include paths and then your paths. So is there any questions related to the CSS/Sass support or SCSS? Post CSS? Oh yeah, we support post CSS by default. So you can add a .post CSS config, and then it will allow you to override our default config. By default, we apply CSS nano and stuff, and you can see the full list in our documentation. So does that answer that? Okay. Any other questions for CSS and SCSS? Okay. Okay, and then we can quickly showcase AMP support before we dive into some blog examples. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, you can, let's pull this out. Sudoku. Restart our server. So Next.js supports AMP mode as mentioned earlier, and you can enable it by doing export. Okay. Type that so we don't make a mistake. And AMP can be either true, which means AMP first, and you will not render in a normal client-side like React context, or you can do hybrid mode, which allows you to have one version that is AMP and then one version that is React. So let's start with React AMP first. Actually, let's check out to that. Let's close that. Okay. And then if we want to do, pull it back. AMP. We don't need data side stuff, but you could use get server side props if you want, so we can make that as a demo. Let's redirect. Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're in the pages now. This gives us this AMP true. So here's an AMP image, and you can notice in the console, the AMP mode is enabled. And then if we do something invalid, like using image for AMP, it'll give us an error. So it automatically does AMP validation with HMR. And it also does AMP optimizations. So it will apply the AMP optimizer for you at build time and when you're runtime. And all of these pages can be opted into get static props, get server side props, just as normal pages. So this is AMP first, it's only AMP mode. And you can also do hybrid mode. So when you first render it, it doesn't have AMP enabled. It's only in a React context. So this link works like normal if I have an index page. And then if we want to go to the AMP version, we can go AMP equals 1, which is the way to opt in when you're doing server-side rendering, which you can see in the canonical tag, which we generate for you. Oh, AMP HTML right there. So that shows you where the AMP version is. And you can also tell which version you're rendering in by use AMP from next/AMP. So this is a hook. You can use your function components. So let's see. Yeah, so not AMP. Maybe goes one, AMP. In hybrid mode for AMP, do you still need to use AMP-specific syntax when writing markup, or will that be converted for you? So you do need to write the AMP image when in AMP mode, and then when you're in React mode. So if you're rendering an image and you're in hybrid mode, you want to do use AMP, and then you want to put this in there. And then in React mode, you want to use a normal image. But the optimizer automatically imports the AMP image script for you and everything. So if you use AMP carousel or something, it'll add the imports for you. I hope that answers that one. And then with AMP mode, you do need to use style.jsx currently to style your pages, because AMP has high restrictions on the CSS you can use. So if you go over that limit, it'll be technically called invalid AMP and will not be cached at the edge for Google search. So we allow you to use style.jsx, which we collect and put into the style tag for you. So you can still do global and then scoped. So scoped is a default, and you can add global for global. So let's throw that in there. And then this is in AMP mode, and then style.jsx also works in normal mode without any configuration. Is there any questions related to that? Okay. Cool. And then, as I mentioned, you can use get server-side props and everything for AMP pages too. And then, do you want to take over and show blog starter, Luis?
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome. Switch mode.
Second, let's share my screen. I can use my screen.
Yep.
That's, we've been working really hard on getting CMS examples and blog examples to showcase the new data fetching methods that Next.js is offering. We're going to feature two of those. First one is a very simple blog style demo, which uses Markdown files to create your blog. So we have the demo right here. In this demo, there is a blog where you can go to any blog post and all the content that you're currently seeing, like the image, the name of the author itself, the content, everything is coming from a Markdown file, and Next.js is rendering it through data fetching methods. So to run this example locally, you can go to the example page in Next.js. That will be Next.js examples, blog style. And then there is a set of how to use it using jar create app. Create Next app. I can copy this, paste it in a new folder. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to run jar. I'm going to run create Next app. I'm going to use one example from the examples folder that's called blog startup, and I'm going to create a blog startup app folder. Create Next app is going to download all the required dependencies. This should not take very long. And once that's done, it should be able to go into the folder and run the app. Nice, so now it's telling me that I should go to blog startup app and run jump there. So the app is going to start in localhost 300, go to localhost 300. It's compiling the index page, and then you have this. This is the blog post. Now, you can change this, and that's the good stuff. So what you can do now is open folder and edit one of the Markdown files. See, we have the index page. And what the index page is doing is, as we see before, we have a React component and we have the props. So all of pages are going to be statically rendered at build time. We have all the posts. This method comes from a simple utility we have in lib. And what happens here is that every post, this is the page that rendered the post. We first get all the paths for every post, then return those paths, and get using get started paths, and then get started posts. We get every single post, we parse the post with Markdown, and return the content as props to the page. So get process log. In this case, we're using FS here, which is read files directly from the file system, and we're also using Gray Matter to read meta description for the Markdown files. And so let's see what the Markdown files have a slug. So the slug is CR file posts and number rolling. So it is getting slug will be posts number rolling. So there should be a Markdown file number rolling. And this is the meta content of the post. So we have the author name, the picture of the author, that is, this goes to public files. So we have public, assets, blog, authors, and then this is JS picture. Then there is an OG image that this will be the cover of the blog post. So now also going to public files, and this is the content of the blog post. If I change something here, this is the generation. Let's change the name to graph. We go to the page. This is local rows, draft, and rolling, and style generation. There's nothing special happening here. We're just reading file with FS, and we're pressing on Markdown. Now, this is a very simple example. Usually, you don't have something like this in production real applications. This is very cool for personal purpose and simple apps, but in more complex use cases, you may have a CMS or a headless CMS. And for those cases, we also have built examples for them, and you can find them by looking up for CMS, the examples folder. So we have one for the CMS, similarly, we have a demo URL to see example. Now, this one has a very special feature, and is that we can do previews here, even in this production URL, also on localhost. So to do that, I'm going to enter Prism.io. It should be on the account that created this, that's handling this deployment. And then there is a blog example. This is Prism UI. And we have the post here. So what I can do now is select one of these posts. Let's let deploy Next.js app. Deploy Next.js apps. let's change the title. So a common theme in the CMS headless world is that once you change something on a post, you first save it, but you haven't published it yet. So I can release this and have it released for a while, or I can have it as a draft. So it hasn't been released. But now I can view the component in preview mode, and that will take me to this page and show me a version of the page that's not available, but that I can use to preview the document. So if I do this right now, it's going to take me to localhost. I started school for the demo, but because I haven't cloned the right one, I haven't run it localhost, I'm going to change this a bit to support the current deployment. So this is the URL of my deployment, and to other one. And then in this case, what Prismic and all the other CMS examples are going to do is the headless CMS is going to send a request with a token and the post to preview, just a token. And then the Next.js app is going to use an API route to handle that token and allow the current browser, the current window to access preview mode. So here I'm going to use API preview, as that's where the API is currently living at. Going to create a preview, so now I have one preview mode for the element, another one for production. Now, if I go back to the draft post, and then to preview, I have selection the element and production. If I go to production, it's going to take me to the same domain that I added, and now I'm in preview mode. So this is, again, this is on production, this is now the element environment. So what I can do here is feature any change that that I might be adding to any blog post. And if I click here, I go into HTTP mode. All right, one big difference between this mode and the other one is that in preview mode, you're always doing a serverless request, like you're always service rendering the content, so that's why it's going to take a little more to render a page, because this is not being statically generated, but that's only for preview mode. So if I change this again, then I refresh the page, should be able to see, or maybe not. But in the case of Prismit, I have to go to preview mode again. But once I'm here, I can click here to preview mode, and I'm back at the exact same site that I had before with the release changes. Now, once this is ready, I can publish it. And once you have been published, it is not going to date, because, for example, it's not featuring revaluation, but if it has a revaluation after the page, it should be updated if the revaluation is set to a and so how I take the posts will be by triggering in a deployment. So that's it for the Prisma example. I wanted to like clone it locally, but I still want to give JJ time for the Notion blog example, which is going to be very similar to the example for feature Notion. JJ?
Yeah, so I can take back the screen real quick.
Yes. Oh, great. Any questions? Please leave them there. Every CMS example should be ready to go. You only have to follow a small amount of steps to get in an account in the CMS provider, and then after that, setting up some two environment variables to connect between the services, and that's it.
Okay, so pull up this Notion example. Page 5. So this is the example. This is using, instead of completely static, it's using the new experimental revalidation behavior. So it allows it to revalidate in the background after it's been deployed, which is different from the preview mode. So the preview mode, you typically only want to see the changes if you have permission to see it. But the revalidate behavior lets everyone see it. Can you still not see the screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, let me restart it. Can you guys see it now? Okay, cool. So this is the behavior for revalidate. So down here, I defined 10 seconds for revalidate. Let's jump into Notion real quick. This is the wrong one. Let's log out. Log into the demo one. Okay, and then we have our test blog. Our blog. So this is the one I'm running off of. So you can see over here. Notice how the transitions are super fast because it's all pre-generated, but you can still update in the background. So let's pull this down. Change the title. So now we have to wait 10 seconds. And now it's updated in the background while always being fast and static. It's a really nice feature to allow you to do slow API requests while still having the reliability of static. So give it a second. So you can like lower this value to have it revalidate more often or less often. It's more so preference for what your data requirements are. And all this data is being rendered through React, which is nice. And then this is using get static paths also, which has the fallback behavior. So you could do revalidate with fallback false, but you can also do validate with fallback true. Is there any questions related to this? So, and if you want to check this out or deploy it on your own, you can see the repo. And then you can even deploy it right from the README using the deploy button right here. Okay, so can we manually trigger update instead of time interval? This is a feature we're looking into. So it would be similar to preview mode, how you could enter preview mode through an API endpoint. We're looking at revalidating through an API endpoint. So that's definitely something we're looking into. So then you're not doing needless revalidations. You can do it based off of when you know your data changed. But at this point, not yet. So it's still in the RFC phase. So feel free to comment on our RFC that I shared earlier in the chat. Are the revalidations done every X seconds or X seconds after the page is loaded? So as you request it, so let's go back to the, close that. Okay, so we go to the blog. So once I visit this page, if it's past 10 seconds from the last revalidation, it will trigger another revalidation. So now it should be triggering another revalidation in the background. And then once that revalidation is done and I refresh again, it will be available. And then if that was past 10 seconds from that revalidation, then it would trigger another one. Does that answer the question? Is there any other questions related to preview mode or revalidate or just in general? It's about time to wrap up. Can we send old state and after revalidation rehydrate?
Yeah, we are going to be around, we're going to stick around in the Slack.
Yeah, so if you have any other questions, feel free to ask in there. Can you send old state after revalidation rehydrate? Can you expand on the question? So are you trying to use a stale cache and then pull fresh data on the client side? Yeah, so you could achieve that through the get static props and then use effect pattern. And then you could check like the header if the cache is stale or something, and then request new data after it's been updated on the client side. So yeah, definitely possible. So we can take questions for another like 5 minutes and gonna wrap things up. Thanks everyone for joining. It's been awesome.
It's been great. I'm also going to share a link about the feedback form. So for anyone who might want to fill it.
Can Next generate fully static sites that I can serve from S3, for example? Yeah, so you can use get static props and get static paths, and that generates it to the .next folder. And then if you want to deploy it somewhere else and you need it in the normal format, you can use yarn next export, which will output it to an out folder with a typical .html structure. I hope that answers that. And there's more documentation on next export and our docs if you want to look. Thanks, everybody.
Nice. JJ.
Yeah.
Do you know to finish the Zoom call?
To end the meeting?
I think you're the host.
Oh yeah, I can just, yeah, I can end it.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.